Welcome to the Next. I'm the host, Jason Jacobs. This show sorts through the nuances of athlete development through the lenses of a dad who's trying to sort through those nuances with my own kids, and also as an entrepreneur who's in the early stages of building my next company, which is a new kind of athlete development company starting in hockey. Today's guest is Hunter Bishop. Hunter played his junior and college career in the Fairbanks Ice Dogs, the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders. He had a great journey at the Vernon Vipers in the BCHL, where he tallied 97 points in the 2007-2008 season and held the franchise record for goals in a season and all-time goals. For college, he went to the University of North Dakota to play, got 4 games in, decided the fruit wasn't ripe yet, and went back to juniors. Then he ultimately landed at Ohio State, where he had a couple of good years that culminated in signing an entry-level NHL contract with the Montreal Canadiens in 2010. He went on to play across multiple leagues in the AHL, in the ECHL, and in Europe. And post his playing career and coaching, he retired in 2019, settled in Charleston, South Carolina, and founded Hunter Bishop Hockey, where he offers hockey camps and player development programs, both for little guys and girls, all the way through training a bunch of pro players, including some well-known ones. We have a great discussion in this episode about Hunter's hockey path, and I'll tell you, this guy is all heart. He's got a really inspiring story. We also talk about his thoughts on the player development path, both his own, but also his advice for others that are coming up the ranks today. He talks about how the game has changed and his philosophies on player development. And we also just talk generally about how to balance optimizing for hockey, which is a long and grueling road, with optimizing for life, and where those were aligned in Hunter's case and where they ultimately diverged, at least from a playing standpoint. At any rate, really wonderful discussion. Grateful to Hunter for coming on the show. Hunter, welcome.
All right. Thanks for having me. I'm ready to roll.
Yeah, I'm psyched. And I have to say, so I've known Kevin McCoy a long time, though not in a hockey capacity. And then as my hockey side has gotten reawakened, as my kids got more into it, and now I'm even moving into it professionally, then I uncovered that Kevin had taken the same pill. And yeah, so we did a great episode. And then he's, hey, you got to talk to Hunter. He's awesome. And I didn't know you from a hole in the wall. I don't know a lot of my info on hockey's dated decades, but I heard a podcast preparing for this. We had a great chat, first of all, offline. And then I listened to a podcast you did with the Vipers broadcaster guy back in, I think it was 2020. Your story is so awesome.
Yeah, it's a wild one, but it's cliche to say the world is small, but obviously the hockey world's extremely small. And I'm sure you and I could go round and around and find 100 people that we mutually know in the game.
We're already uncovering it, right? Because I recorded with Freddie Meyer, and then I mentioned you as recording with Freddie Meyer, and you're like, he coached me in the AHL.
Yeah, it was his first year. He was fresh out of the game, an incredible human being, just so upbeat and energetic. Like, as a player, there's nothing better than having a guy like that come in who just gives you everything and is excited and fresh out of the game. Like, his perspective was so raw. I loved having Freddie as a coach.
And I think we'll get into it, but I think what struck me about your episode, it wasn't, like the hockey story is long and twisted and gripping and all that, but there's just a lot of life packed in there too. And I think it's just a good reminder that it's easy to just get, especially as a hockey dad with my first one through the chute, and only one because his little sister doesn't play, you can lose perspective. And I think keeping the perspective that while hockey can be super important, that life is most important, I think is just a good reminder for everybody.
Yep, 100%. I think I look back at my path and I call it unique. There's probably 1,000 stories like mine, but I feel like everybody's story is so different in how they came up in the game and what it's done for them. But I go back through your podcast and it's fun to hear the similarities in perspective after the game and some of the approaches, and even just listening to Freddie's, like, his approach is spot on to how he coached, right? Just enthusiasm and building the passion. So it's fun to hear from different people, which I think is really cool what you're doing here.
I'm having a lot of fun and I'm learning a lot too. And speaking of, maybe we should get into some of your journey. So I want to hear the hockey story, but before we even do, just kind of frame for listeners what you're up to today with Hunter Bishop Hockey.
So I guess that hopefully I don't ruin your flow here, but I'll go back to the beginning. I grew up in a
Okay, fine.
I'll go back to the beginning because I think it's important for me what I grew up doing. Obviously, I love the game, but there's a couple people that I got involved with at 14, 15 years old that kind of shaped what I do today. I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska. It's about 75,000 people. So I wouldn't say it's a small town. For Alaska, it's one of the largest, but the closest teams were 6 hours away in Anchorage. A little bit of a unique hockey market in that sense, but old school. My dad, he played hockey. He loved the game. He called it semi-pro, but I think it was a glorified beer league in Alaska. But he just loved the game, had me on the bench when I was probably 3.
I heard on that other show, he coached you all the way through, right?
He coached me all the way through. Took me from the beginning. He loved the skating component. He drove that one hard. He was all about power skating. And we had another guy that took my age group. My dad followed me all the way up to Bantam, but I had another guy named Roger McKinnon who I had coached professionally, and he ended up getting my age group, and he took us all the way through, which obviously had a giant impact, I think, on my development growing up in Fairbanks. But yeah, dad was there from the beginning. I can remember being in the locker room with the boys after a Sunday night men's league skate. So I think that's where kind of the love of the game grew. I go back and ask my dad, did I always know it was hockey? And he said, yeah, from the beginning, it's all I wanted to do. Of course, Alaska's frozen 9 months a year, so there's not a whole lot of other sports going on anyway. Hockey's kind of the game and the sport there. But yeah, it was hockey from the start. Of course, I played other sports, but just loved the game from an early age. And when I was about 13, maybe 12, 13, there's a camp called Turcotte Stick Handling Camp. And they came to Alaska. They did the Alaska Swing, and I did the camps every summer. It was all about skill and hands, and just they had a great formula for a Monday through Friday. And as a player, you could see how much better your hands got in a 5-day span. Just repetitive motion, and everything was broken down, and the structure of it. I just absolutely loved it. It was my favorite camp growing up. And then when I was about 14, I started working in the camp. He said, hey, maybe you should start working the camp. You're a little too old to be in the camp, a lot of younger players. So I worked with Turcotte, Al, and Jeff for a couple of years. And then when I was 17, Jeff called me and said, hey, I'm not coming this year. We want you to run them. And I worked a couple camps, but I had no idea what I was doing, running one myself. So they threw me to the fire. I ran 3 camps, Wasilla, Anchorage, and Fairbanks. And just, that was my start in player development, I guess. As a 17-year-old, I'm working with younger guys. I'm holding parent meetings. And I just loved it. I hired my buddies who were playing juniors. I had my sister working with me. And we just drove around Alaska
Who played D1 hockey yourself?
My sister played at Ohio State at the same time. It was just a really neat transition into kind of the coaching side of the game. But I loved teaching skill development early. So that was my intro to it. So leading into segue, fast forward a couple years later, 2019, or I guess 2017, I actually, the year before, I had brought Turcotte camps to Charleston because my wife and I had picked Charleston as my off-season training spot. And I reached out to Turcotte and said, hey, they'd love to run a Turcotte camp clinic here. So I ran one of those in 2016. And then 2017, I said, hey, I'd like to start my own thing. And that's where Hunter Bishop Hockey got started. So I ran my first HBH camps in 2017 while I was still playing. And then obviously in 2019, that's when I kind of jumped in full time.
And it's interesting because it would be easy to spend the whole episode going chronologically through your career. And in some ways, I think we should do that. But the problem is if we did that, there's just so much substance. So I might just do some of that in the intro, right? And then we can kind of get right to the good stuff. And I'm sure it'll get woven in. But for example, you talk about how you just love the game out of the gate and there wasn't a lot else to do in Alaska. One interesting trend I'm seeing is that before kids even have the agency to love, the game's just getting thrust upon them, right? And before it's even clear that all they ever want to do is hockey, all they're ever doing is hockey. And what do you think about that?
I'm a big advocate of multi-sport athletes. I'm definitely on that side. I don't love that hockey's become a 365-day sport. And maybe a lot of that's coming from my own experience. We shut the wheels down after the season for the summer. Of course, I did summer camps and the Laura Stam power ski, the Turcotte stick handling camps. Like I did the skill development camps, but I played soccer, I played football, I dabbled in a couple other sports. I think I played soccer and football pretty much up till high school when I think you got to pick up a narrower path. But I think it's important to play other sports, even from just a mental standpoint, athleticism standpoint. I think it's good to be well-rounded. I love to hear that kids take a break and they play something else for a certain period of the year. I think it's important to give yourself rest from the ice and get to a point where you're excited to be back at the rink and you're not just going through the motions. And of course, every kid's different and there's obviously different scenarios there. But for me, it was important to take that break and have other sports and just being a well-rounded athlete is, I think, important.
You talked about how you knew the game was for you from an early age. Did you have goals in the game? And if so, when did those come about and what were they? And I ask because that's a topic that came up in that recent episode I did with Freddie, where we're talking about the difference between goals and love and compete in the moment. And he has his views, but I'm curious what your views are and what your story was in that regard.
Yeah, so I look back, I think growing up as any young kid playing hockey, like, of course, yes, I wanted to be in the NHL. I had my favorite team. I had my favorite players. I love the Penguins, Mario Lemieux, Yager. Hockey was my passion. I was hockey all day, every day. It's odd because I never really had the goal of playing college hockey. I always, in my head, was like, I want to make it to the NHL. That was my mindset. Early, I was all in, I would say from probably 5 or 6 in. And I can remember even being 8, 9. It's you're at school. It's what do you want to be when you get older? It was from an early age. I want to play in the NHL. And I think I was in that category of just obsessed. It's all I wanted to do. It's especially by the time I was like 9, 10, decision making and playing hockey and shooting pucks. That was my identity early. But I guess to answer your question, I do think it's important to be in the moment as well and the passion. I know Freddie touched on that too. And this is my approach to player development. But I think the passion is the most important component to all that because, yeah, my goal was to play in the NHL, but I loved to play hockey. Like I wanted to play. I'd come home from school. I wanted to go skate on my outdoor rink. I didn't go out there because I thought this is going to get me to the NHL. Of course, it does help you to attain your goals, but I went out there because Charlie Britt and Logan Toohey were coming over. We're going to play one-on-one or just keep away. I just love to play the game. So I think the goal doesn't happen without the other. I think the passion component is the most important piece. And you got to love the game. It has to be fun. If you're going to get up at 6 a.m. to skate before school, you got to do it because you love the game. Otherwise it feels like work. And it should never feel like work. It should feel like I love to do this. This is what I want. This is where I'm happy. So I think that staying in the moment, doing it because you love it and it's fun, that's the most important component in my eyes.
And it's interesting because you hear that a lot of the former players who are coming on the show. They talk about how growing up, they get home and they just went and play with their buddies and compete and fun. And now, I don't know how it is in other parts of the world, but I feel like here in New England, and it's one of the reasons why I'm trying to bring a global representation of the sport, right? So I do start to learn how it is in other parts of the world, but kids aren't doing that. They're getting picked up at school and going to shooting, and then they're going to edge work, and then they're going to the gym, and then they're going to practice, right? I'm exaggerating, right? But it's very structured, and it's, oh, you have an off day. Okay, let's like go to the bottom of the hill and put your parachute on. You know what I mean? And you're a skills guy now for a living, and I've also heard you talk about the value of specialty skills like shooting, and I'm sure there's other specialty skills that also have value. Edge work. How do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, we could talk for the rest of the hour on that. I guess my basis is, and I tell parents this, I said, it really needs to come from the player, especially as they get older. There's nothing worse for me than having a player come out for a lesson who doesn't really want to be there and their parents are pushing them to be there. So there has to be a connection between what the player wants and what the parents want. Does the player want to get better? Yes. But is it fun for him to put the work in to get better? That answer has to be yes too. Otherwise, we're not going to get very far on my side in the development piece. So I think there's got to be a strong want and strong need and strong passion from the kid, which is why I think in my position and other guys that are in my position, you have to make hockey fun first and foremost for the players. Like, it has to be a skill session. Like, edge work you got to make it fun for the kids, right? If it's not fun for the kids, they're not going to enjoy working on edge work. But your skating is probably at some point going to weed a lot of players out. So you have to work on it. And that's always been my approach at camp. It's, hey, I'm going to expect you guys to work really hard. You're going to get better in the 5 days that you're with me, but we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. And to me, that's the first thing I talk about in any camp that I run is you're going to enjoy your time here. You're going to look forward to coming back in the morning. You're going to work hard. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to really enjoy ourselves while we're at the rink. And I think, to me, like I said, that it's the groundwork. Like, it has to be there. The passion has to be there. And it is tough because it is very structured. And I think kids get a little bit overloaded with the structure. It's like you're at school from 7:30 to 2:30, and then it's power skating. You go outside and you work with the shooting coach. And I think for certain kids, when they're on the same page as mom and dad, and it's, no, I want that. I want to be at the rink. I love shooting pucks. You wouldn't believe how much better my wrist shot's gotten, or I can shoot it 12 inches off the ice, posting in low blocker because of the work I've done with this guy. So I think when the kid loves it and it makes sense from that point, then it's great. But when it's the other way and the kids are exhausted and it's I don't really want to go today, I think that's when parents need to maybe take a half or a step back and say, okay, they're not enjoying it as much. I think the kids got to have fun, or at some point, not that they're going to resent the game, but there's a lot of sacrifices that go into growing level to level in hockey. And those sacrifices, if you're all in and you're passionate about the sport, they don't feel like sacrifices at all because it's what you love to do.
I largely agree with that, but let me just, for sake of argument, let me give you a fictitious counterexample that will spur some dialogue, right? And because I wrestle with this as a dad, because on the one hand, it's like, of course, you want to keep it fun. You want to let the kids be kids. If they're not doing it out of love, they're never going to stick with it. It's a long road. So I get all that. Here's the counterexample. It's a non-hockey one, I'm making it up, but it's, hey, like, when I was 10, my dad would bring me out. My dad was a farmer, and he would bring me out like on the tractor and like baling hay and milking the cows and doing whatever. And I didn't like it at the time, but I look back and I credit so much of my success in life to that work ethic that he instilled from the earliest ages. And if you had asked me in the moment, I never would have wanted to do it, but I'm so glad you did that for me.
Yeah.
Are we babying the kids?
Yes, I would baby the kids. Okay, so I think that's a great point, because I think kids are kids and they're young and maybe they're tired. Other things are going on in their life. They're going to have those days. I think there just has to be, and maybe I was talking more about the extreme of that. I'm referring more to the extreme because, the
kids that are blurry eyed because like they clearly all they need is like sleep or an off day, and yet they're getting dragged to a triple session.
I think it's the parent's job to make sure that the balance is there, I guess, is the most important. And everybody knows their kid best. But yes, to your point, of course, there's times where you need to push your kid that extra step. And hey, but I think the dialogue has to be clear. It's okay, you told me that you want to make that team next year. Okay, how does that happen? And I think as long as kids have the understanding of, if that's what you want and this is what you're trying to get to, these are the things that you got to do, and you're going to have off days. But I think the most important thing is that it doesn't creep into and I know this is a conversation you've talked to, and Freddie touched on it, but I think back to, you could do a whole podcast on the car ride home, right? The car ride home after the sport. And
You should start a podcast called The Car Ride Home.
Called The Car Ride Home, right? So it's those conversations. And I think back to the conversations I've had with my dad, and those were the most important in the car ride home. And then as I got older and we could go back and forth a little more aggressively, those conversations were that much more important. And I remember my dad wouldn't bring it up unless I asked, right? Unless I asked and wanted his opinion. But if I wanted to shut it off and clear my head from a game, he let me. But if I asked, he gave me the raw, honest opinion. But I think just keeping a healthy balance of where your kid's at, how much of their life is consuming, and just to keep them passionate about the game, I think is really important, because it's a long road to get to the top and to make it to high levels. And I think it's important to keep kids in a good mental state from that point.
Another thing I talked about with Freddie, and it sounds like you listened to that episode as well, but it's just, if Freddie's point of view was that you should be dominating at a level before you move up, and that if you move up too early, it can be detrimental. And while we aren't going to go through a chronological journey of your long, illustrious career with a twisting past, one surgical strike I would like to make is that you got to University of North Dakota, and 4 games in, you made the decision to leave and go back to juniors because you felt like you weren't ready and you wanted more development. That is a fascinating decision. And while it's not exactly in line with Freddie's point, it's related to Freddie's point. And I'd love to just hear more about your mindset at the time in that decision process, and also with the benefit of hindsight now, so many years later, what life lessons you take away from that and what advice you have for others.
Yeah. So that decision was a direct connection to a lesson I felt like I learned earlier. So my sophomore season of high school, I played in the ECHL for my Fairbanks Ice Dogs. And I had a solid year. I was the youngest kid on the team. I think I finished the season well. I think I started out in the bottom 6. I finished the season in the top 6. It's first year of junior hockey. I'm 16 playing with 20-year-olds. There was a lot of learning curve, I think, that went into that year. The next year, my junior year, I decided to jump into the USHL in Cedar Rapids. And that year specifically was one of the hardest years, I feel like, in my career, because first year away from home, we won the championship that year. The team was stacked. Teddy Purcell, Justin Abdicator, Alex Stalock. Like, we had a stud group, but I was in and out on the fourth line every game, and it was a really hard year for me. And frankly, I was pretty unhappy that year. It just was a really tough year for me. I felt like confidence-wise, it was challenging on that aspect as well. To Freddie's point, I think it is important to dominate in a level before making the jump to the next level. Hindsight 2020, was I ready to jump into the USHL that year? Maybe not. But ultimately, I made the decision to leave the USHL and go to the BCHL, be a little closer home. We had a great contact in the BCHL that ended up stepping into a really great environment and just a league that really fit my game in the BCHL. My time in Vernon had a really great, I would say, a good first year in the BCHL. I didn't dominate, but I had a good year, and that's where the conversation started with North Dakota. And we really wrestled with the decision of whether to go as a true freshman or not. I think it went all the way till the deadline of when I had to decide of, am I ready to go play at a top collegiate program next season? And we made the decision to go. And again, TJ Oshie, Jonathan Taves, like, I'm on a team with some NHL legends, and at Christmas time, I'd played 4 games, fourth line, limited minutes. And contrary to everybody else, and including my parents, I remember calling, I said, hey, I think I'm going to leave North Dakota and I'm going to go back to Vernon and go play more juniors. And I remember my mom and dad like, hey, you really need to think this through. I don't think they didn't agree with the decision. Obviously, North Dakota didn't agree with the decision. People relied on, but my gut said, hey, we had, I think, 1 or 2 seniors that year. And I knew that if they didn't lose a bunch of bodies that year, I was going to be in a very similar position and role the next year. That's how I felt. So I thought and made the decision, hey, let's go back to Vernon. I wanted to keep that confidence in my game. I didn't conquer the BCHL yet. Like, I didn't dominate that league. And I knew that. And that's, I think, a lot of the reason that we struggled with the decision of whether I was ready to lead. But it was a really hard one for me because I was at one of the best college programs in the U.S. and great coaching staff, great everything. But for me, it just didn't feel right. I felt like I was losing my confidence in the game, and I just slowly gotten that back, going back to Vernon. That was a big confidence building season for me. To go back to not having that, it's something I didn't want to lose. Yeah, I think you look at youth players who are chasing the 3-letter league. You need to dominate double A, or you need to dominate single A before you play double A, and you need to dominate double A before I think you're ready to make a decision to leave home or go play for another program and drive hours to play AAA, because at the end of the day, that the grass isn't going to be greener on that side. You're not going to play as many minutes. The development components not going to be quite as good. Again, everybody's past unique. Obviously, mine was unique, but I do feel it's very important that you dominate at the level you're at before you jump to the next one, because confidence and timing play a big piece in your success as you move along the path, in this game at least.
So there's a semi-related point I want to touch on, and that's a quote that you hear frequently in the hockey world, which is that they all end up in beer league eventually. And I bring that up because the hockey path, as you've lived, is a long, grueling road. And I'm just learning. Again, my oldest is 13, but we're even, as we start to think about high school, it's reclass or not. And then some kids are reclassing twice, right? And then and then you're not just going to go straight from high school to college. Then there's juniors, and depending on where you live and where you end up, like, you might need to leave and go live with a billet family. And then kids might leave high school early to go to juniors and do Zoom school to finish their degree. And I feel like an old man sometimes, because when I started my first company, my parents thought I was nuts. And they were like, wait, you're leaving a job and you have no other job lined up? And then you hear stories of like famous musicians who, when they told their parents they weren't going to college and they were going to hit the road and try to make a go of it, like that it like caused World War III in the house, or actors moving to LA and waiting tables. And it's like, you're 28, you give up the dream. And so I guess my question is, given that they all end up in beer league eventually, how do you balance as a player optimizing for hockey versus optimizing for life? And then what role should the parents play in terms of keeping your kid from torturing themselves on the life path, but also not squashing their dreams?
Yeah, it's I guess the hope and dream of any parent is that the game is gonna give them that. Exactly. Like, the two are correlated together. Your dream, and at my camp, we do, in our off ice, we do lesson, I call it lesson hours, school, classroom work. But one of my favorite ones to talk about is being a good teammate. And obviously being a good teammate translates directly to just being a good person. And being a good person is going to translate to being happy and successful, hopefully after the game is over. And it's less than 1% that makes it, right? And I tell kids, it's to get paid to play this game. There's no greater it's a job, but it never feels like a job. But there's no greater job than to get paid to play the sport that you love. It's an amazing dream to chase. And I feel like for me, it's shaped who I am today. And I love and I have zero regret in what I did. But the game gave me so much more than just chasing an NHL dream, right? It gives you that structure in your life to be successful afterwards and to be detailed and to put in the work and to compete and have that edge and that drive that, is going to make you successful, whether it's in hockey or any other aspect of your life. To me, I think the whole goal and the structure of hockey should be exactly that, to set them up after the game, right? The game should give you the structure and the foundation and the pillars to be successful outside of hockey. And that truly is, and I hope is, the approach of other skill developers and guys that are developing young athletes. It's give them that foundation that's going to make them successful, not just in hockey, but in life as well. And if that's the approach, I think the game's always going to result in a win, whether they make it to the level that they were set out to or not. Like the game of hockey is going to be a win for them in the overall picture of their life.
I agree with that. There's so many life lessons that come from the game, and not just hockey, all sports. And I'm seeing that with both of my kids. I think the other side to that is that I've heard you say, and I've heard many players say, that the transition out of playing the game is a really tough one. And it almost seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the longer you stay in the game, the harder it is to transition. It's almost, I don't know if you've ever saw Shawshank Redemption, but it's like Brooks, when he finally gets out of prison, he's like, all he wants to do is go back because he doesn't know any other way. So maybe to talk a little bit about that, about your transition from the game, but also just that transition in general and how you think about that relative to all the valuable lessons that you get from the game that you can apply to life outside of the game.
Yeah. So I think there's no way around it. When you decide to hang up the skates and you're not doing the sport you've been playing since you were 4 or 5, there's no way around that not being a tough transition. I think it's habit. It's what you do. I think the things you miss the most as a player, obviously you miss the game, but most importantly, you miss the people and your teammates and just that team aspect, the team camaraderie. And I talked to a lot of my former teammates who are now in corporate or they started their own business, and a lot of my college teammates have ended up in like medical sales or firemen. And I think ultimately what they end up finding is a similar culture to that. They're finding that team aspect or an environment where they feel like they're competing, you know what I mean? And they get that same adrenaline and passion that they had with hockey. They find it in other jobs. Yeah, obviously it's a struggle. I think just to come out of the game and the lifestyle and that part of it. For me, I had started the player development while I was still playing. So I think that probably made my transition a little bit easier, maybe than somebody who goes cold turkey and they're not on the ice anymore. I took a job putting together a junior program here in the Charleston area. So my first year retired, I was at the rink more than I was as a player, and I was recruiting the next generation, and I went right in hockey to hockey and just was on the other side of the game. So obviously that had its challenges, but the following year I went full time with Hunter Bishop hockey and just skill development camps and got involved with the youth program. And then COVID happened and it got a little bit challenging on the hockey side and for everybody.
That's when you went on the podcast circuit, when it was challenging on the hockey side.
Yeah, I'm running camps. I got a mask on. I feel like I can't breathe on the ice. That was just a strange time, obviously for everybody. But right after COVID, I ended up jumping into a franchise. I own me and my wife and my brother-in-law, who's my business partner. We own 4 butcher shop franchises. 3
when
years.
You did that, or when last time an article was written about it, it was 1. So now it's 4.
Yeah, we own 3 of them here in Charleston, and then we own one up in Cincinnati, Ohio. So now I have a pretty good balance between hockey and helping out on that front. But
Is that a franchise?
yeah, it's a franchise.
What are you
Originated
gonna
here-
do? You should do mini rinks next.
Mini rinks, yeah. I would love to do mini rinks. Because here in Charleston, we have one twin rinks. We have the Coliseum where the pro team plays out of, but essentially there's only one spot where hockey's happening on a year-round basis. So it's the game's definitely growing here in Charleston. I think I stepped into a pretty great situation. There's a lot of pro guys that have retired here and are now getting involved, have kids, and now they're getting involved. And so many people have moved down from New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. So the game has really grown here in Charleston, and I feel really fortunate to have been a part of that. We have some really good young players who are starting to move into junior and college, and it's just really fun to watch the game grow in this area. And to be honest, I love what I do. I think even as a player, once I started HBH, I knew that doing player development or being involved in hockey to some capacity is what I would do when the game was done. And I feel like I have a really great balance now between two different worlds with the Butcher franchise and skill development. For me, it's been a somewhat easy transition. On the flip side of that, the guys that play in their late 30s and aren't sure what, maybe they didn't go to school, they're not sure what they would do after. Yeah, I think that.
And still need to work.
Yeah, and still needing to work. That's if you played 12, 15 years in the ECHL, you made great money, you made smart investments. I think that's obviously a much easier transition than the guy who's you're playing the career out. I think it's important. You should always be planning for, always have that fallback, continued education. You have to have other passions and other things that make you happy. You can finding that balance, like I said before, and being healthy is all about balance. So it's the same with the game. You gotta. I think it was important for me, at least, and it's how my mom and dad brought me up. You're going to do well in school. If you don't get good grades, you're not going to play hockey, because they knew it's at some point you got to have both, and there has to be an onus on both ends. Yeah, I think it's important to think about what you're going to do after the game, and like I said, continue education and have that fallback plan.
So another player development point that I wanted to kind of pressure test with you is, on the one hand, I've heard you talk about the importance of specialized instruction. So shooting or skating or stick handling or whatever. At the same time, there is a lot of talk about how important it is to develop kids in a way where it's translatable to a game situation, and where there's compete wherever possible, where there's fun wherever possible. If you separate a skill on an island, an example is shooting. If you just take 100 shots, but you're standing flat-footed taking 100 shots, right? Like, how often in a game situation are you standing flat-footed and taking any shots, right? There's coverage. You got to get it off quick. You might be in motion. You might be off balance, right? And so if you're not practicing in those settings, it's not going to be as transferable. So I guess my questions here are, one, how do you think about translatable versus specialized instruction? Maybe that's one of one. Yeah. That's the question.
I think obviously you have to crawl before you walk, and you have to walk before you run. I think the progression is really important. I think it's really obviously with the younger guys. If they don't have the foundation of how to load the puck and shoot a wrist shot, you can't even talk about the different shot selections, right? As I've grown in what I do as far as the player development, I think doing the translatable skills and the position specific stuff is really what I focus on now. But again, with the young guys, you have to go back to the basics, and where to load the puck and your follow through and hand placement and all those things really matter when they're younger. But I do think as players get older, it's really important to dive shooting and scoring, becoming a better goal scorer. That's probably, I feel is my niche as a skill developer, is shot selections and how to put yourself in position to get shots off, most importantly, and then the habits that are going to result in more goals. Those are the things that I really like to drill home at. I think it's so important to work on the different shot selections, right? Like you can't just work on shooting. Yeah, you like the foundation is just how to shoot a proper one-timer, but where are you going to shoot a one-timer from, right, is the second step of that. And not everybody can score from the goal line or just above it like Draisaitl, like finding the dots and finding the house and where your chest follow throughs, like those little details in skill, I think are what really make the difference. Because, and I believe everybody would say this, when you get to the highest levels in the game, the differences between your second line guy or your third line guy and let's say like your top 3 forwards and your top 6 forwards is so small, right? And the guy that scores 25 versus the guy that scores 15, there's little small differences in his game that make him that much more successful. So I think for me, that's the funnest part of skill development, is finding those little consistencies, those little habits that players can see visually and translate that into their game. One of my favorite camps that I do is I call it Geno camp or goal scoring camp. But each day the players come in and we pick a different player. Maybe it's Cole Caulfield or Draisaitl or Austin Matthews. And the players will come in, we'll watch every goal that they scored that year. And I'll have a statistical breakdown of what shot selection they used, how many one-timers, how many tip-tap rebounds, how many catch and release patterns. We'll see whether they scored in we call it ABC zone. So were they right in the house? Were they right in the crease? Were they in the house, or were they on the perimeter? Did they score from the left side, the right side? And then we'll go out on the ice and we'll practice those shot selections and the consistent ways that they scored. And I think for me, as a skill developer and as a player, it's so clear, right? They see it, we talk about it, they watch it again, and then we go out and practice it. And of course, you can't be great at shooting one-timers on the goal line until you've conquered the baseline skill of shooting a one-timer. But I think for me, those specific skills is the funnest thing to work on. And for the pros, I think that is what makes players successful, is the details of the game. And that's where I like to focus.
What are your thoughts on video? You mentioned video already in terms of looking at some of the clips of the pros, but when it comes to your own video, what role should it have in an ideal world? And then how does that inform or in a perfect world, how does that inform the skills instruction as it relates to any of the different skills that you might go to a player development coach to work on? But also, does it open the door to a new kind of instruction that might not fit cleanly in a box of any one specific skill? And for lack of a better word, let's just call it hockey IQ.
Hockey IQ. Hockey IQ is probably, it's the hardest. It's the topic that comes up all the time. Yeah, he's great, but his hockey sense is lacking. Like, he's a really skilled player, but he doesn't understand the timing of the game. How do you teach that? And then as a player, you're on a team and maybe the coach doesn't have access or doesn't like cutting footage. Like, it's just I think there's definitely a gap there in player development. Obviously at the pro and college and most junior world, like, those clips are readily available. They may have the personnel to sit down with players and watch. But I think when you go back into youth, it's not always accessible, as accessible. And for me, it's the visual of watching the best players in the world and seeing how they do things is one of the most important things that young players could do today to understand the game. The video component, I take a player and I can draw a drill up on the board and then I could send them out there to do it and it wouldn't go well at all. But if I draw it up on the board and then I go out and I demo it myself, that player might catch on right away. So every kid is so different in the way that they'll grasp a concept. So I think you have to tie in both. And I think the video component is it's an amazing tool for young players to understand the game. And I know that's something that you're probably diving into a little deeper.
I'm trying to, yeah. I'm in the early stages, but let me probe on that a bit more. I'm imagining, so first, just a clarification question. So sometimes you do private, sometimes you do small groups, sometimes you do camps. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So in each of those settings, do you have the chance to watch those players either in the privates or in the small group or in the camps in game settings? And if not, would it be useful? And yeah, I guess if you did, or if you do, how does that change how you might work with them in a player development capacity, if at all?
So I do use video. Goal scoring camp, we use video a lot. When I do small group privates, if I have a really specific skill that we're going to try to work on, I think showing an example of it on video helps. I don't use it as often as I should. It's a lot of work cutting film, right? And putting together examples. And I have a great contact and a guy named Jacob Smolovich who coaches, but I think having that arsenal of video that you could show players would be a huge bonus, I think, in a player development session. But I think most importantly, through the year, right? It's if a player says, I'm struggling on the half wall in my own end, I feel like my coach doesn't trust me to be out there when we're up by a goal because of turning pucks over. I think in that instance, you could show a player, a similar person in the ECHL who's a left winger, and you could show all their half wall D zone decision making, right? And then you could create some skill development that would make them more successful in different scenarios in half wall breakouts in their own end. So I think that's the progression that video could be used in. It's here's where you're struggling. Here's an example of the decisions you made that were incorrect. Okay, here's some examples of a way that you could break the puck out or make a better decision on the half wall. And here's some skills that you can work on in stick and puck or with your trainer that are going to increase your percentage of breaking the puck out more consistently. So I think that's where video can be a powerful tool. Obviously, it's great to watch, and the game happens so fast, and hindsight's always 20/20. A half wall roll is a half wall roll, and if you watch 20 clips, there's probably some big consistencies in a half wall roll on a power play or rolling downhill on your strong side like Matthews, right? And what opens up. So I think to be a steady early game and using the video component could be a very powerful tool, especially at the youth amateur level, for players to understand the game. And obviously there's different levels in that, but I think back to something as simple as 2-on-1 decisions, right? And when to shoot, when to pass, how to hide, to not showcase what your cards are, and just to watch how the best players in the world do it and take those skills and bring them into your game, I think I wish I would have had it when I was coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I've uncovered, and it sounds like you even do some of this, but there's, some coaches out there who they start with video and they watch your games, and then they get a sense of where you're at, and then they might pick off some themes that are high frequency and high leverage if you could address. And some of them might be skills based, but some of them might have nothing to do with skills. It might just have to do with positioning, decision making, as an example, and then show you the clips, and then find clips of NHLers who are doing it right as the gold standard, and then get you on the ice and kind of work on those things specifically in a translatable way, whether it's in a private or as a small group. And it feels like it's really teaching, and it's so powerful. But to your point, it's so labor intensive, right? Especially on the video side. And the question I've been asking is just if there were a way to scale it. And I don't mean from one-on-one to a million people or something, but just make it so that you could make that magical teaching be accessible to more people. And I don't know if that means assembling, it could be a law firm structure where you have like seniors and then associates, the equivalent of associates and paralegals who don't bill as expensively as like the managing partner. I mean, that's an example. And that's another thing we can talk about with Hunter Bishop Hockey, right? Because I know that you have a pretty sizable team now. There's other examples where maybe technology has a role. So you mentioned it's very labor intensive on the video side. What's labor intensive about it? And is that things that either a junior human or the machines might be able to pick off? And if we could make it less labor intensive, then it means potentially that it would cost you less hours. And if it costs you less hours, then you could charge less money and it could be more accessible, or you could have a bigger client base. You don't cap out at 10 people or whatever. So those are some things I'm thinking about. And it's fascinating to hear from people like you that are in the trenches doing this in kind of the highest touch way, since I think that will inform what's possible in maybe a lighter touch way.
Yeah, I think players are hungry for more feedback, more information. I think they're hungry to get better, right? They're hungry to get more ice and more opportunity. Sometimes those conversations can be not awkward, but challenging to have within a team, right? With your coach, and you don't want to be in his office every week. So you got to not pick and choose your spots, but I think that navigating those waters can be a little bit tricky for players. Having access to, I get this question all the time, and it might be like a private message on Instagram, but hey, can you send me some drills to make my shot better? Or can you send me, I'm struggling scoring. Do you have anything you suggest? So I think that's a hard one from far when I don't have all my stuff readily available on app drills, readily available through an app that I can just zip to them. So I think there's definitely a piece that's missing there, that players could be getting a lot more purposeful information from skill developers where they could see examples. And I keep going back to video because I'm struggling offensively. Okay, I can watch his clips. I can give him verbal feedback. We can watch his clips and dissect it, but it's not perfect. And it definitely could be more purposeful and a little bit cleaner if it's, okay, here's a 3-on-2 example. And here you force the packet pass in the middle. Here's what you didn't see. Here's an example of what it looks like when it works. Or here's an example of what you could do without the puck, and your timing to come into that F3 spot to get that pass from cross ice. I think when players can watch it and not just watch their mistake, but watch it done successfully, that's when it clicks with a lot of guys. And I think that's where it can be really powerful.
I just had one crazy idea as we were talking, but there's this company out there that you can essentially build an avatar of yourself. And the more information you feed it about yourself, the better job it can do of representing you when you're not there. And you can engage with it. Like, people can engage with it. So you could just like have a public web. You could stick your avatar on Hunter Bishop Hockey, right? And if you feed the machines that power your avatar, whatever you got, clips of you doing teaching sessions, reports, analysis that you've pulled together for different players, like whatever you got, right? And then the more you have and the more granular it is, like the smarter the machine gets, right? And imagine if every player development coach had a virtual representation of themselves that anyone could go to and just ask questions like, send me a clip on this or that. And it's just going to be you when you're not around.
Call me old school. That's a scary thought, but I think the basis is fun. The idea and concept that any player around the world could upload their shifts and you could pick out, and where do they want to focus? I want to focus on the offensive part of it, and to put together an analysis of here's where you're falling short a little bit and your decision making need improvement, and here's some examples of what that improvement would look like, and then here's a tactical skill development plan that's gonna make you more successful in those scenarios. I think it's an incredible concept and tool that can be utilized. But yeah, I don't know, Avatar, HVH, I'm not sure.
It's hard to sort through because on the one hand, you have player development people that might say you hear different things. You will hear like, it's never going to replace the human because like a D1 head coach said this to me yesterday, an episode that's going to ship soon, said that like the X's and O's are the easy part. It's the human element of how you communicate stuff and in what format you communicate it, and knowing your players and knowing like which ones you can like dress down in front of the team and which ones you need to give a heads up in advance. And it's like the psychology of it is almost more important than the X's and O's, right? And so in that regard, like the machines will never replace the human. But the other side is you hear people say, shoot, like I'm on a treadmill in a services business and I want something to run whether or not I'm running, right?
Yep.
And how do I get that, right? But then you also hear, yeah, but if I can't trust it, then it's worse than not having it at all. So either I want the good stuff or I want nothing, but don't give me like untrustworthy stuff that works sometimes and doesn't others. And I have to parse through when to listen and when not. I just want to either trust it or not. So it's confusing as a potential product creator or service creator of some form to figure out what the right balance is, or how do you get leverage without compromising quality, and how do you balance it? See, it's clear there's going to need to be trade-offs, but figuring out like what trade-offs to make for which things, right, it is definitely more art than science, and it's largely untreaded ground, right? It's daunting, but also pretty, I don't know, at least to me, pretty exciting to try to figure it out.
Yeah, really, it's really exciting. Obviously, the reach aspect and just the accessibility and if it's consistent. But I think, like I said, I keep going back to the video, and I think it's underutilized. And whether it's AI or in person, I think for players to have access to more video to learn the game and, you know, grow that hockey IQ, I think could be a really fun and powerful tool that can be utilized for sure.
I feel like there's a whole lot more for us to talk about, but we're already up to over 70 minutes. And so I guess maybe this is a good place to wrap. Is there anything I didn't ask that you wish I did, or any parting words you'd like to leave with listeners?
I think, obviously, thanks for having me on. This has been great. We could probably do a whole nother episode and dive into a bunch of other concepts, but I love what I do. I love the game of hockey and how it's shaped my life. For the young players out there, I think I go back to the word love or passion. Learn to love the game, be passionate and purposeful about what you do, and the game's going to love you back. I think that's where the basis starts. It shouldn't feel like work. It should feel like I'm doing what I love. This is where I'm happy. And of course, there's sacrifices along the way, and there's early alarms and different foods that maybe aren't as tasty as others. But at the end of the day, you're going to be really happy with the result. And it's the greatest game in the world. And there's nothing better than playing hockey for a living.
I can tell you one thing for sure. If we lived in South Carolina, I would be taking my kids to check out Hunter Bishop hockey.
I appreciate that. I got HBH camps are a lot of fun, but it's the team I have around me. I have an unbelievable group of guys that are still playing pro, guys that are playing college junior that come out and give back to the game and coach alongside me. And we just have a really great group here that's just growing the game of hockey and getting kids excited about coming to the rink.
Awesome. Hunter, thanks so much for coming on the show. Thanks for all you do for the kids and for the sport. And I'll be following along, cheering for you. And who knows, as I get further along, maybe there's some stuff we can do together.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you for tuning in to the Next. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, and you haven't already, you can subscribe from your favorite podcast player, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or any of the others. We also send a newsletter every week on the journey itself, the new content that we publish, the questions that we're wrestling with, how the platform itself is coming along that we're planning to build for player development, and where we could use some help. And you can find that at thenextnext.substack.com. Thanks a lot, and see you soon.